After having done 3 movies back to back, what did Martin Scorsese do next? Directed another one. Because of his collective exhaustion and pneumonia put together, Scorsese ended up going to the hospital but was on set to film this before he was even fully recovered. And much like the main character of the film, Rupert Pumpkin was ready to do anything to get this done. Ready to tell the story of Rupert Pumpkin, the hack New York comic trying to push his way to the top by any means necessary to get on TV, the first thing to do was to cast Johnny Carson as Jerry Langford, whose life ends up getting taken over by Rupert, who just doesn't see that there isn't really a friendship between them. Slated to play this role of Rupert, Andy Kaufman, who was replaced by Robert De Niro, big surprise. Despite his health concerns, things were coming together. Carson declined. Other than not really being a film actor, Carson just wasn't fully convinced that the script was appropriate. A film about a character who's not afraid to use excessive force to get on a television show? Carson refused to play the role. He just feared that the film could possibly inspire psychopaths. Psychopaths like John Hinckley. In 1976, Hinckley became obsessed with the film Taxi Driver, also directed by Scorsese. A film in which the main character, Travis Bickle, who is also played by Robert De Niro, plots to assassinate a presidential candidate. However, John was more focused on the supporting character, played by Jodie Foster. At the time, Foster was only 12 years old and was playing a child caught in sex trafficking. John developed an infatuation with her. He became obsessed. He saw the movie 15 times. He kept rereading the book the movie was based on, bought the soundtrack, and would listen to it for hours on end. John identified with Travis and started imitating how he dressed, how he talked, how he acted. Being an outsider just as Travis is, he absorbed his personality, which is why he likely believed that he was rescuing Jodie Foster when he followed her to Yale University in 1980. Obsessed with his television show and personality, Rupert one day oversteps his boundary when he steps into Jerry Langford's car, played by Jerry Lewis. They exchange some words about Rupert's comedy career, and then he's on his way. Not after harassing Jerry a little more, though.
Jerry. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks. Jerry. Hey, Jerry.
We then cut to a conversation between Rupert and Jerry having lunch. Jerry asks Rupert to host the show, and it seems like there's a sizable gap in their relationship we missed. But as the scene progresses, we see that in reality, this is actually just a delusion that Rupert is having.
Don't you understand? What?
What are you doing down there so late?
It's impossible. I'm trying to tell you that. What do you want? You want the tears to come out of my eyes?
The audience aren't the ones missing a big gap in their relationship. It's Rupert. What happened in Jerry and Rupert's actual conversation is that Jerry suggested he come by his office sometime in order to go over his comedy. He says that maybe then he could be considered as the stand-up on the late night show. The office aide informs him that Jerry isn't there and that he might as well just leave. Rupert insists on waiting. And waiting, and waiting, and waiting. And being kicked out, and recording some comedy.
What's the matter with you?
Mom!
And being kicked out again. If you haven't noticed, Rupert has trouble taking a hint. But is that completely his fault? Isn't that the point of television and movies? Especially with late night television, isn't the goal to find the person very personable and to see yourself having a conversation with them? It interests me just how willing people are to be so blatantly rude to celebrities on Twitter. It's almost like they feel like they know them so well through their art form that they just feel they can say anything to them.
Jerry, would you please sign my autograph? Sign my magazine for me.
Yeah.
You're just wonderful. I've watched you your entire career. You're a joy to the world. Please, Laura, would you just please say something to my nephew Morris on the phone? He's in the hospital.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
You should only get cancer. I hope you get cancer.
But again, isn't that, say, the reason for being the face of a late night show? To be someone the general public can like and interact with? Rupert knows Jerry. So why is it so hard for him to get through to him? With his friend. Are him and Jerry not friends? Well, that can't be. Rupert had a conversation with him where he invited him over to his house for the weekend. Oh, you missed that part? Well, don't worry, it didn't really happen. It's another delusion he's having. But interestingly enough, it almost seems like we can see reality slipping into it. Not even Rupert can fully convince himself that this is real. Well, that just means he has to take the extra steps to make it real. He better drop by his house uninvited this weekend. John ended up moving to New Haven, Connecticut, where Yale University is. There, he stalked Jodie Foster at her university. He would slip poems and messages under her door and repeatedly called her and left her messages on the phone. He left so many messages and letters that went unanswered by Foster that he decided to take a Yale writing course just to be near her. He did end up having 2 telephone conversations with Jodie Foster, and there, like any normal person, he assured her he was not dangerous. But even after these conversations, somehow he didn't feel a true connection between them. He thought he should maybe just hijack an aircraft or commit suicide or something in front of her to get her attention. Too cliché, he thought. And then it dawned on him. He needed to do something that would gain her respect and love, something that would make him notable, something that would make him famous just like she was. He needed to kill the President of the United States. Rupert invites his former high school crush, Rita, to go with him to Jerry Langford's house unannounced, assuring Rita the whole time that they're good friends, of course. When he gets there, the house staff is not so pleased. Again, they assure him that Jerry's not there, and also again Rupert insists on waiting. Jerry eventually comes home and finds them settling in. Jerry slowly gets angrier and angrier and eventually yells at Rupert to leave.
All right, so I made a mistake.
So did Hitler.
Rupert doesn't understand what's going on, and you can even see in his face that he's refusing to believe it. How could Jerry be this rude to him? All he's done is worship the ground he's walked on and only said great things about him.
I'm a little short on cash, but if you don't mind just appetizers, I'd love to take you to dinner sometime.
Gerald, good seeing you. Jerry. You know, lots of people think that guys like you, people who've made it, lose their feeling for struggling young talents such as myself. But now I know from experience that those people are just cynics embittered by their own failure.
It's too much for him to ask him just one favor, to listen to his comedy reel?
I'm glad what you did to me today. You know that? Because now I know I can't rely on anybody. Not you, not anybody. And I shouldn't rely on anybody.
Right.
You know that? And you want to know something else? I'm going to work 50 times harder. And I'm going to be 50 times more famous than you.
Then you're gonna have idiots like you playing your life.
That's right.
Right.
Yes. Come on, Rita. We're wasting our time.
Go ahead, Rita.
Goodbye, Jerry.
Rupert decides it's time to take more drastic measures. John began seeing a psychiatrist at his parents' insistence. The previous fall, he was arrested at the airport when airport security detected handguns in his suitcases. He was in Nashville at the time. He had been following Jimmy Carter's campaign appearances. This arrest caused his guns to be confiscated. This triggered him to buy 2 more .22 caliber handguns when visiting his sister. John's psychiatrist diagnosed that his problems stemmed from emotional immaturity and recommended that his parents cut him off financially and forced him to make it on his own. At the end of February, John flew to Hollywood, where he stayed for 1 day before taking a bus to the Park Central Hotel in Washington, D.C. in March. On Monday, March 30th, John would write his final letter to Jodie Foster. Over the past 7 months, I've left you dozens of poems, letters, and love messages in the faint hope that you could develop an interest in me. Although we talked on the phone a couple times, I never had the nerve to simply approach you and introduce myself. The reason I'm going ahead with this attempt now is because I cannot wait any longer to impress you. John. Fed up with rejection, Rupert decides to kidnap Jerry, with his totally sane friend Masha. She's the one that got Rupert into the car with Jerry in the first place. They kidnap Jerry in a car as he's walking down the street and bring him back to her apartment. Rupert has Jerry call his executives and his plans finally revealed. With the executives reluctantly on board, Rupert prepares for his big night. After a quick conversation with the FBI at the studio, it's lights, camera, and action. The bullet struck President Ronald Reagan in the left chest, Press Secretary James Brady in the left temple, Officer Thomas Delante in the neck, and Security Agent Timothy J. McCarthy in the stomach. While everybody survived, Delante would suffer severe brain damage for the rest of his life. Rupert's stand-up routine goes off without a hitch, and then he's off to watch it at the bar before being arrested. What follows is, in my opinion, the most shocking moment of the film. We're finally shown Rupert's stand-up routine, which has been teased throughout the whole film, and he's funny. Not only funny, really funny, and he has good material.
But like everyone else, I grew up in large part thanks to my mother. If she were only here today, I'd say, "Hey, Mom, what are you doing here? You've been dead for 9 years." We used to drink milk together after school. Mine was homogenized. Hers was loaded. Once they picked her up for speeding. They clocked her doing 50. All right, but in our garage?
It's pretty dark, but many would consider it ahead of its time in 1982. Rupert went through all of this trouble, doing something highly illegal and getting himself caught on purpose, when he could have probably made it on his own. But when you think about it, doesn't this sort of make sense? There are so many talented people in the world, and what do they do with their talent? A lot of them spend it trying to get the attention of someone who's already made it. And even when not pining for their success, are pining for their attention, wanting to be notable by proxy for having their attention. They end up falling in love with someone because they represent the idea of everything they want. They don't love the person, they love the idea of the person.
No, you fucking don't. You do not. Stop participating. Not a participatory thing going on up here.
People are so desperate to be notable, to be remembered in some capacity after they're gone, that they turn to drastic measures. And oftentimes don't become famous, they become infamous. Rupert is sentenced to 6 years in prison, but makes parole in 2. He releases an autobiography and becomes a millionaire overnight. News breaks that it's being picked up to be made into a film, and Rupert even returns to comedy for his first television special. John was immediately arrested on site at the shooting. A year later at his trial, he was charged with 13 offenses, all of which were dropped due to him being found not guilty for reasons of insanity. Hinckley was confined at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. He later wrote that the shooting was the greatest love offering in the history of the world, and his biggest disappointment was that Jodie Foster did not reciprocate that love. John was released from St. Elizabeth's in August 2016. He is no longer considered a threat to himself or others. He is now required to live full-time at his mother's home in Williamsburg, Virginia, along with the following prohibitions: using alcohol, possessing firearms of any kind, contacting Reagan's family, Brady's family, Jodie Foster, Foster's family, Foster's agent, from watching or listening to violent movies, television, or compact discs, from accessing printed or online pornography, speaking to the press, visiting homes, past homes or graves of the current president, past presidents, certain past or present government officials, erasing his computer's web browser history, and is required to work at least 3 days per week, to leave immediately if he finds himself approaching prohibited places, and to not drive from his mother's home more than 30 miles unattended or 50 miles when attended. May sound like not much of a life, but hey, it's like Rupert says.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.
Jesus loves you more than you will know. Whoa, whoa, whoa. God bless the please, Mrs. Robinson. Heaven holds a place for those who pray. Hey, 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 hey. We'd like to know a little bit about you for our files. We'd like to help you learn to help yourself.